Summer, 1812. Napoleon Bonaparte sets the largest army in Western history, marching east into Russian territory at the head of a force so vast, it takes 5 full days just to cross a single river. He plans to end the war in 5 weeks. He will not. To understand how two empires win a war, you have to go back 5 years. In the summer of 1807, Napoleon had just broken the Russian army at Friedland, a defeat decisive enough to bring Tsar Alexander I to the negotiating table in person. Their meeting was arranged on a raft anchored in the middle of the Niemen River, neutral ground, belonging to neither man. What came out of Tilsit surprised Europe. The two emperors struck a genuine partnership. France and Russia divided the continent between them and pledged to stand together against Britain. It would not last. Over the next 5 years, that alliance fell apart, not because of a single betrayal, but because of 5. Napoleon carved the Duchy of Warsaw from conquered Polish territories. For Russia, a French-sponsored Poland on her western border was an immediate strategic threat, and the fear that Napoleon intended to restore Polish independence fully made St. Petersburg deeply uneasy. Then came the marriage question. Napoleon proposed Alexander's youngest sister, Grand Duchess Anna Pavlovna, seeking to bind the alliance dynastically. The Romanovs refused, politely at first, then firmly. Napoleon turned to Vienna, marrying Marie-Louise of Austria in 1810, drawing France closer to a rival court at Russia's expense. That same year, he annexed the Duchy of Oldenburg, a principality ruled by Alexander's own brother-in-law, breaking a direct commitment made at Tilsit. But the deepest wound was the continental system. At Tilsit, Russia had agreed to close her ports to British trade. The economic damage was severe, her merchants losing fortunes, her treasury under growing strain. By late 1810, Russia had simply stopped complying. When Napoleon discovered this, what remained of the two men's goodwill evaporated entirely. Both emperors accused the other of bad faith. War had become a question of when, not whether. Napoleon's response was a force on a scale the world had never seen. Final counts put the army at around 680,000 men, though fewer than 1 in 3 were actually French. Poles fought under Prince Poniatowski with the discipline of veterans. Germans came from the kingdoms of Saxony, Westphalia, and Bavaria. Italians, Swiss, Croats, and Dutch units filled out the order of battle. Even Prussia and Austria, France's recent enemies, sent contingents coerced rather than convinced. 3 armies were formed. Napoleon commanded the main body. His stepson Eugene, Viceroy of Italy, led the second. His younger brother Jerome, King of Westphalia, commanded the third. Marshal MacDonald held the northern flank with a large Prussian corps. General Schwarzenberg's Austrians guarded the south. Another 100,000 men, under Marshal Victor, remained in reserve. Neither Eugene nor Jerome had commanded at this scale before. The campaign would quickly reveal which of the two was equal to the challenge, and which was not. Against this juggernaut, Russia could initially field only around 220,000 men, Barclay de Tolly's First Army, Bagration's Second, and Tormasov's Third in the south, outnumbered by more than 3 to 1. But before the invasion began, Russia secured 2 strategic gifts. Sweden had fought Russia as recently as 1809, losing Finland in the process. By a curious turn of events, Sweden was now governed by one of Napoleon's own former marshals, Bernadotte. But after Napoleon seized Swedish Pomerania without consultation, a furious Bernadotte quietly assured St. Petersburg of Swedish neutrality. To the south, a peace treaty ended 6 years of war with the Ottoman Empire, freeing up Russian forces from the Turkish front entirely. Both of Russia's exposed flanks were secured before a single French soldier had set foot on Russian soil. On June 24, 1812, the Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory. The crossing alone took 5 days. Napoleon's plan called for a rapid strike north of the Pripyat marshes to destroy Barclay's army before it could link up with Bagration, while Jerome held Bagration in place to the south. Once Barclay was beaten, the 2 French wings would close together like a vice. Napoleon expected to be finished within 5 weeks. Barclay refused to fight on Napoleon's terms. Facing an army of overwhelming size, the cautious Russian commander chose retreat, burning crops, emptying granaries, and stripping the countryside of anything that might sustain an advancing enemy. Bagration, aggressive by instinct and frequently Barclay's harshest critic, reluctantly agreed there was no better option. To the south, Jerome was meant to pin Bagration long enough for Davout's corps to swing around and cut off his retreat. Jerome moved too slowly. Bagration escaped before the trap could close. Napoleon's fury at his brother was total. When Jerome found his troops transferred to Davout's command, he took it as a personal humiliation, abandoned his post, and returned to his kingdom in Westphalia. The campaign was barely 2 weeks old, and it was already going wrong. Napoleon had prepared for logistics on an unprecedented scale. Supply depots, dedicated transport columns, material calculated for a deep campaign in hostile territory. It wasn't enough. Russia's roads were poor at the best of times. Summer thunderstorms turned them to deep mud, bogging down wagon trains for days. Frontline troops marched without rations. Thousands of young conscripts, many on their first campaign, collapsed under the combination of heat, hunger, and relentless daily marching. Desertions mounted steadily. By the time the army had advanced 250 miles, it had already lost around 1 soldier in 5 to exhaustion and disease, primarily typhus and dysentery. Without fighting a single major engagement, the army had entered Russia with roughly 250,000 horses. By midsummer, they were dying at a rate of 1,000 per day, worn out, starving in a landscape stripped bare of fodder. These were not only cavalry mounts. They were the animals pulling the artillery, the supply wagons, the ambulances. Every horse that died made the logistical crisis deeper. And it was at precisely this moment that Napoleon's light cavalry, his scouting arm, his eyes on the battlefield, met an adversary they were entirely unprepared for. The Cossacks. They didn't fight by European rules. They never sought a pitched engagement. Instead, they shadowed the French columns day and night, striking at isolated detachments and supply trains before dissolving back into forest and marshland. French patrols sent out for reconnaissance frequently didn't come back. Napoleon grew increasingly blind to Russian positions and movements, a fatal problem for a commander whose entire method depended on speed and precise information. Napoleon halted at Vitebsk for 16 days. 2 engagements steadied his flanks. Schwarzenberg defeated a Russian force at Gorodetsna to the south. A combined French-Bavarian formation fought Wittgenstein's corps to a standstill at Polotsk in the north. The flanks held, for now, but his main force had been reduced to less than half its original strength. He decided to push on to Smolensk. Barclay was under mounting pressure from Bagration and from Alexander and St. Petersburg to stop retreating and force a battle. With the 1st and 2nd Russian armies finally linked up, Barclay launched an offensive of his own. His Cossacks caught a French cavalry division off guard in Kovo, but alarming reports of a French flanking move to the north caused Barclay to abort the operation before it could develop. Napoleon moved immediately. Screening his advance with Murat's cavalry to keep Barclay in the dark, the emperor swung his main force south, crossed the Dnieper River in darkness on 4 pontoon bridges on the night of August 13th, and drove hard for Smolensk, aiming to cut the Russian army's line of retreat. It was Napoleon at his most brilliant. A single Russian division fought a dogged rearguard action from Krasny, slowing the French advance by critical hours. Reinforcements reached Smolensk before the city could be taken by surprise. Napoleon marked his 43rd birthday with a parade. The assault waited 2 more days. When the attack came, it was direct. 150 French guns opened on Smolensk's ancient stone walls. 3 corps assaulted simultaneously. The Russians held, but Barclay, fearing encirclement, ordered withdrawal. French troops fought their way into a city already consumed by flames. One final chance emerged at Valutino, where Ney's 3rd Corps caught Barclay's rear guard in the open. General Junot received orders to cross the river and seal the Russian escape route. He crossed and then stood still. The Russian army slipped away. Napoleon would later remark that Junot had squandered his one chance at a marshal's baton. Smolensk had cost both sides around 10,000 casualties and settled nothing. Napoleon paused and considered his options. His generals urged caution. The army was spent, supply lines dangerously overstretched, autumn approaching. winter at Smolensk, resumed the campaign in 1813. But Moscow was only 230 miles away, Russia's ancient capital, no longer its administrative center since Peter the Great had moved at to St. Petersburg a century earlier, but still its spiritual and emotional heart was a prize Alexander could not surrender without a fight, and Napoleon needed a fight more than anything else. He ordered the advance to continue. That summer, Alexander had framed the conflict in terms that reached deep into Russian identity, calling a holy war to defend Mother Russia against what he described as an antichrist come to desecrate sacred soil. The response from Russian society went far beyond ordinary wartime patriotism. He also changed the supreme commander. General Mikhail Kutuzov, who had suffered one of his heaviest defeats against Napoleon at Austerlitz in 1805, was appointed over Barclay. His record had since been rebuilt in successful campaigns against the Ottomans, and among Russian soldiers, his name carried near legendary weight. He was, above all, a true Russian, and the troops trusted him completely. Kutuzov understood, as Barclay had, that constant retreat was strategically sound. But he also understood something else. If Moscow fell without a battle, the political consequences could be catastrophic. He chose his ground. 70 miles west of Moscow, near the village of Borodino, the Russian army stopped retreating and began to dig. Europe was about to witness the bloodiest single day in the history of the Napoleonic Wars. But that battle and the legendary retreat from Moscow that followed is a story for the next video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me bring these stories to life. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. Who do you think made the bigger mistake so far? Was it Napoleon for underestimating the sheer size of Russia, or Barclay de Tolly for letting the French advance so deep into the homeland without a major fight? Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you in the next one.